So, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Today we are stitching up a leather cigar case. In this particular case, excuse the pun, we have crocodile skin, and this is a butt stitch. So instead of stitching down into something, this is the same seam. This is the back side, this is the front side, and it's stitching across. It's called a butt stitch because both sides of the edge is actually butted up to itself and then stitched in like so. I'll demonstrate what that's like. So first of all, I'm going to open up these holes. So we created these holes here using a pricking iron and an awl. And the reason we use an awl is because you don't prick all the way through with your pricking iron. You prick through part way. It's more of a stitch marker. And then instead of going straight down with the awl, you actually come in at an angle because you're stitching into yourself like that. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is stitch, and pretty much like a normal saddle stitch, to be honest with you. That's how it starts off. Then as I come up towards the end, I simply press in with my fingers first and just use my nail, and then I cinch up the thread to that. The reason I'm doing that is because we're using 11 stitches per inch. This is a tiny pricking iron. That's what it looks like. Okay, it's a vintage pricking iron. If you compare that to a 3mm stitch spacing, which is more like 9 stitches per inch, you can see it's a lot smaller. So if you put too much tension on there, so I'm closing the gap manually and then snugging the thread up to that. So that's a little tip that I can give you if you're working with really thin leather or small pricking iron spaces. And then these ones not so much. And I'm keeping the cigar case safe by just putting it between two bits of leather and some weights. That's it. It's the only tension we need, just enough. And you'll notice I've got masking tape on the case as well. And the reason for this is because you want to kind of form this around the former, which we have on the inside, which is a hard former. And you want it held together with masking tape first, rather than get the stitches to take all the pressure. And masking tape obviously is much better at being removed without disrupting the grain layer on the surface. If you use tape that's too sticky, it can actually cause damage. Okay, it's a little waxy. Now moving up, there's different ways of doing this. You probably just pick at this if you want. But I'm going to take my blade, find that little gap and just pull back a little bit, remove a bit of tape, expose some new prick marks, and then carry on stitching up. So it's really as simple as that. And I'd stitch just like a saddle stitch, as I said before. Left needle comes through into a T, pulling through, turning for the right needle, pushing that through, and then pulling in. I'm not casting. Strangely enough, when you cast on a butt stitch, it tends to make the rear side, which is actually this side here, straight. Strangely enough. So I stitch without a cast. And it gives you a little bit of an angle on both sides, which is always nice. And if ever there's a bit of a gap forming, don't always pull tight with the stitches. Push that in first and then bring the stitches up to it, and they will stop it expanding back out. Really well waxed thread also helps with this as well. If it's not waxed enough, it doesn't hold that stitch. And it just kind of opens back out. We want to keep that tension once it's put in place. Once we cinch that in, it kind of holds. That's well waxed thread. So in this case, I don't want to, use heat or anything like that to melt the wax in. I actually want it sitting on the surface. I can give it a blast of hot air afterwards just to melt the wax into the thread and the leather that's sitting on the surface there, as you can see. Or just give it a buff. So stitching this with fil chinois 632, so it's quite a thin thread. This is obviously to complement the small pricking iron. But I've chosen a color that's in the same spectrum as this really dark, deep burgundy. This is a burgundy thread. But it's just a few shades lighter, which I often like because it doesn't distract from the case itself. It doesn't take away the attention away from that beautiful crocodile. It just kind of complements it. It lets you know that it's there. That's why I always like to go just like a shade off or a tone off, a couple tones lighter. I generally call this a semi-contrast. It's my favorite. Just a personal preference, really. I mean, you could stitch this with, a real contrast, like white, for example. But it does take away a lot of the attention. The eye is immediately drawn to it. So it's just something to be aware of. And especially if you're using alligator skin, which is it's quite lumpy and bumpy. You've got areas, high spots and low spots. And the low spots are also softer than the high spots. So it tends to create an environment that's very difficult to stitch consistently with a seam that looks straight without any flaws. It's a very difficult process to do. You have to kind of vary your tension as you're stitching along. So it takes a bit of practice and a little bit of experience to do. But if you are making this with, say, straight veg tan or goat skin or something similar, then it really doesn't matter because you've got a consistent surface. This is quite an inconsistent landscape, so sometimes you just got to find those little prick marks that you created and went through with the awl. So I've got a question here. Could you use polyester thread for this project. Yeah, I mean, you can use virtually any thread that you like. I prefer, especially with when making traditional goods like this, like a leather cigar case, I do prefer using linen thread, like fil chinois, barber's thread, anything like that, especially vintage pieces that I usually find on eBay from when linen thread used to be much better, in my opinion anyway. But yeah, of course you can use polyester. It'd be more consistent. I mean, here's some polyester thread here. You know, that would work quite well with this. But I actually like the traditional look. I mean, linen thread is a little less consistent, but it's kind of consistently inconsistent, a little bit like the leather that you're working with, you know. Many of us pursue the perfect looking thread that has to be the exact same thickness and it has to be perfectly the same all the way along, yet they don't expect that of the leather that they're stitching it to. And it is literally just a different perspective. I don't mind the natural look of linen, just a slight variability. It gives a bit more character to it, a little bit the same way I like looking at leather and seeing a little bit of character on the leather, you know, some, you know, growth lines rather, you know, a few scars here and there, a little, you know, noticing a change in the color because it's a natural aniline dye. I kind of like that inconsistent look, but yeah, absolutely, you can use whatever thread. As long as it's strong and durable, then it's fine to use. Another question there. Is it more difficult working with exotic skins such as alligator and crocodile, etc.? Yes, it is. It is and it isn't. It requires a little bit more focus and you have to think about it a little bit more. It's more easy to make mistakes on exotic skins than it is on regular skins, cowhide, calf leather, goat skin, etc. The downside to that is, of course, it's a very expensive mistake. So you have to kind of stop and think and plan exactly what you're going to do, taking pieces and testing. Everything you do, always testing. What does this stitch look like on it? Is the heat on this creasing iron too much? Taking a piece of scrap from your hide and testing everything on there, the glue, the wax that you finish up with, the conditioner, and as well cutting and stitching. There's some variability because it's not a consistent surface. It's, you know, as I said before, high spots and low spots, and the low spots in between the tiles are, you know, several times softer, so everything tends to sink in more. Stitching, crease lines, everything. So you know, you really have to kind of get to know the leather before working with it, starting with simple projects, working up to intermediate and more advanced projects as you go. I wouldn't recommend, you know, even if you have experience making bags, taking exotic skins and then just, you know, expecting your skills to transfer immediately. I would start with smaller projects and work your way up. That way, you know, you're going to build your confidence as you go along. Because the last thing you want to do is spend a lot of money on exotic skins and then end up with a huge mistake. And you're going to have to make, you know, a lot more wallets and watch straps out of the panels that you cut. And it's a crying shame. But learn, gain your experience, and then build up in complexity and difficulty as you go. Hello from Nebraska. Hello, Phil. Is this project for Crocodile? Sorry, I'm reading at a funny angle. Is it for Crocodile only or any leather? Any leather. The reason I'm using this particular skin is because I looked at it and I could envision the cigar case when I looked at it. generally it's kind of what I do when I have a project in mind that I want to create. I go through the skins or the leathers or the hides and think to myself, what would it look like? And then some leathers, I kind of look at it and struggle to imagine what it would look like in that. And then others, I look at it and go, I know exactly what it's going to look like. I know it sounds a bit weird, but I kind of let the leather, the skin kind of speak to me. And then it lets me know, yes, I'm suitable for this. Because I can have a clear vision of what that would look like. And it's, it's my favorite color, burgundy. Love working with it. Always has been. But I really like the look over the entire case. And what I've done, in fact, you notice that there's two distinct seams here. There's a binding over stitch on each side. This is going to be cut in the center to separate. And I've done it in a natural separation area that goes through here so that when the case is together, it's very difficult to see that it's actually two separate pieces. So that's kind of I've done that on purpose. So I'm going to remove this now, which I don't need to use anymore. So it's done its job. Just using a couple weights here. The last thing you want to do is clamp hard on this and cause a dent in it. So just kind of putting it between two weights here with a little bit of leather for protection. Question, sorry, I'm reading it kind of upside down. What do you recommend for conditioning reptile skins? Well, it's funny you say reptile skins because one of the better reptilian conditioners is Reptan. Funny enough, it has it in the name. That's by Sophia, and it contains, I believe, lanolin, which is oil from sheep's wool. Be cautious, some people are allergic to that, but it's very good for reptile skins as it happens. It's a very tight grain. If we put a water droplet on here versus a piece of hide, you'll notice it takes a little bit longer to soak in. It's very, very fine grain, very dense. So what can tend to happen is heavier oils and waxes kind of just sit on the surface. They get filtered out by the dense grain. So you need something with a fine oil. Lanolin is actually very good. It's quite commonly used for reptile skins. But most of the time, your reptile skins are chrome tanned, which doesn't require as much waxing and oiling and conditioning as vegetable tanned would. Veg tan, it's every so often, every 6 months to a year, depending on the use and how much is handled, how much exposure it gets, especially to the elements outside. Veg tan is gonna need more conditioning more often. I actually just wrote a blog on leathercraftmasterclass.com if you guys are interested, going over conditioning itself. So funny you ask. leathercraftmasterclass.com and check out the blog. So this is the last stitch that I'm going to do along this seam here. And what I'm going to do now is a binding over stitch. This is a double binding over stitch versus a single, which is this one on the end here. And I'm going to do one at a time. So I'm taking the opposite side and I'm coming over. Okay, so I'm going to put this needle through, and you'll see as I pull it tight, we have a little stitch coming over the top. Oops. Did that go in my finger? No, it didn't. Luckily, it just caught the top. A little bit of a knot forming there. It's okay, we're right at the end. Good. Get that little cinch down there. And I'm going to do the same thing for the opposite side, and it will sit right next to its little brother there. Okay, binding over stitch, especially a double one on the very ends, just holds everything nice and still and tight. Okay, and you can't really finish on a single. You can start on a single, but finishing on a single is well, is asking for trouble really. Let's cut this first. So cutting it, I've added as much tension as I want to. If it's too loose and you trim these, there's not much going back there, is there? You can't add thread. So I'm going to add a little bit of white glue here. It's your regular white glue, PVA glue, polyvinyl acetate or polyvinyl alcohol. Elmer's glue, I believe it would be, in United States. So I'm going to tuck those in. Of course, I'm not using polyester. I'm using linen here, so we can't melt the ends. I'm going to put a little bit over the top there. Let it soak in for a few seconds, just so that the two bound stitches at the top kind of bond to each other, and then just take away the excess here. Cool. Work that in a bit more. A bit more excess. And now what I can do is take a bone folder and just start working that. And bringing those two butt edges together, starting out with the flat side, and then to get a bit more pressure, use the side of your bone folder. Bit of extra wax there. So just going to remove that. Go back over it. Press those stitches down. So what we're doing, we're kind of tightening the seam up a little bit, but also pressing down that butt stitch so that it's flattened, so it can, it gets less wear over time. So there we go. So that is the exterior. It's going to be cut in the center, and two parts will be separated with obviously the leather wrapped tubes inside, which is a current course available at leathercraftmasterclass.com. And if you're brand new to Leathercraft, don't forget that right now there's a free Leathercraft tutorial showing you exactly how to stitch in much more detail than this live can actually show you. So if you're brand new to it and you want to get involved in Leathercraft, it's a great one to pick up. Or even if you're more experienced but you just want to kind of a refresher course, then go to leathercraftmasterclass.com. There's a pop-up that comes up. Just put your email in there and I'll send the video straight to you. So that is butt stitching exotic skin using 11 stitches per inch, a very fine stitch, nice and small, very traditional. As the old leather cigar cases, exotic skins, they always used to use really, really fine stitching because it was just something that only the craftsman, the fine craftsman, could do with that kind of detail on exotic skins. And it was just, it really complements rather than a thick, chunky stitch. So that is for the course coming up next, which is showing you how to build the exterior. Thank you for watching, guys. Appreciate all the questions and tuning in live. And I will see you very, very soon. Take care.